In a few moments, Rishi Sunak will stand up in front of that Stop the Boats podium. He will walk out in front of it in Downing Street because stopping the boats, one of his top 5 political priorities. But it has been immensely complicated. So let's sort through what we learned today and what we still don't really know. So the legislation that Suella Braverman has published today does one big thing. And that says that forevermore, if you are caught coming over to the United Kingdom on a small boat, you will never again be allowed to apply for asylum in the UK. That will be it. We will take a record of your identity, and you will be barred from any route back into the UK and from ever coming to settle in this country. And here he is to explain his plan.
My policy is very simple. It is this country and your government who should decide who comes here, and not criminal gangs. Now, the first step is understanding the nature and scale of what we are dealing with. The number of people entering the UK illegally in small boats has more than quadrupled in just the last 2 years. Those illegally crossing the Channel are not directly fleeing a war-torn country or persecution or an imminent threat to life. They have travelled through safe European countries. They are paying people smugglers huge sums to make this dangerous and sometimes tragic journey. Now, the reason that criminal gangs continue to bring small boats over here is because they know that our system can be exploited, that once here, illegal migrants can make a multitude of asylum, modern slavery, and spurious human rights claims to frustrate their removal. And the risk remains that those individuals just disappear into the black economy. Now, that is the reality we must deal with. And with 100 million people displaced around the world, if we do not deal with it now, the situation will just get worse and worse. People must know that if they come here illegally, it will result in their detention and swift removal. Once this happens, and they know it will happen, they will not come and the boats will stop. That is why today we are introducing legislation to make clear that if you come here illegally, you can't claim asylum, you can't benefit from our modern slavery protections, you can't make spurious human rights claims, and you can't stay. We will detain those who come here illegally and then remove them in weeks, either to their own country if it is safe to do so, or to a safe third country like Rwanda. And once you are removed, you will be banned, as you are in America and Australia, from ever re-entering our country. This is how we will break the business model of the people smugglers. And this is how we will take back control of our borders. Now, this bill provides the legal framework needed to deliver this in a way that no other legislation has done before. This is tough, but it is necessary and it is fair. And this legislation will be retrospective. If you come on a small boat today, the measures in this bill will apply to you. And this is just part of what we are doing. I've always been clear that this is a complex problem that can't be solved overnight and will require us to use every tool at our disposal. That is why I've already secured the largest ever small boats deal with France, and patrols on French beaches are already up 40%. I also promised progress on enforcement, and we've increased raids on illegal working by 50%. I've also negotiated a new deal with Albania, which accounted for 1/3 of all small boats arrivals. And that's already delivering. We've returned 500 illegal migrants to Albania, and we are seeing far fewer come as a result. This shows that there is nothing inevitable about illegal migration. Deterrence works, and with will and determination, the government can get on top of it, and we will. Now, this will always be a compassionate and generous country. It is something that we're all rightly proud of. Just look at how we've welcomed Ukrainians and Syrians from refugee camps and embraced Hong Kongers fleeing the Chinese clampdown. But the current situation is neither moral nor sustainable. It cannot go on. It's completely unfair on the British people who have opened their homes to genuine refugees, but are now having to spend nearly £6 million a day to put up illegal migrants in hotels. It's unfair on the people who come to this country legally to see others skipping the queue. And it's devastatingly unfair on those who most need our help but can't get it as our asylum system is being overwhelmed by those travelling illegally across the Channel. If we can't stop the boats, our ability to help genuine refugees in future will be constrained. Full control of our borders will allow us to decide who to help and to provide safe and legal routes for those most in need. Now, I understand there will be debate about the toughness of these measures. All I can say is we have tried it every other way and it has not worked. So I say again, my policy is very simple. It is this country and your government who should decide who comes here, not criminal gangs. And I will do whatever is necessary to achieve that. Thank you. It will take some questions from the media. If we could start with the BBC.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Chris Mason, BBC News. If by the time of the next general election you haven't stopped the boats, will you have failed?
Thanks, Chris. So look, I wouldn't be standing here if I didn't think that I could deliver on this promise. At the beginning of the year, I stood up in front of the British people, made 5 promises, and one of them was to stop the boats. And since I've had this job, I've spent a lot of time thinking long and hard about how to solve this problem. And I'm confident that the bill we're introducing today will help us do that. It will mean that for the first time, we will have a system whereby if people come here illegally, they won't be able to stay, they'll be detained and they'll be swiftly removed. And as we deliver on that, people will see that there is no point in coming here. We will have that deterrence effect. But I've also been clear throughout that this is a complicated problem, right? There is no one silver bullet. And the legislation, of course, it's really important, and that's why today is important, but it's just one of the many things we're doing. We need to cooperate with our allies, particularly the French, which is why the deal that the Home Secretary and I worked on at the end of last year is so important, and we hope to continue deepening and strengthening our cooperation with the French and other European allies. It's why the deal we announced with Albania is so important. And I think it's just pause on that for a second. Albania accounted for around a third of our illegal migrants last year. But because of the steps that we've put in place, the new deal that we've announced, what we're seeing now is that we're returning hundreds of people back to Albania, and we're seeing the numbers come down considerably. So that shows to me that if we get this right, it will make a difference. Now, we're in the early stages of it, but we've given it long, hard thought. And, I said at the beginning of the year that, I only promise what I believe I can deliver, and I will absolutely deliver on what I promise, and that's what we're going to do today.
You said help stop the boats. That's not the same as stopping the boats, is it?
Yeah, but all of these things play their part. It's that no one thing is the answer to this question, right? And that is the point. The legislation is absolutely critical. There is no way to stop the boats without this legislation. But this legislation on its own won't do it. That's why we need all the other things that I've talked about as well. All of those things will help us achieve that goal of stopping the boats. But as I said, I promise what I can deliver, and I will deliver what I promise. And that's what we said we would do. That's what we will do. Right, next, we've got ITV.
Prime Minister, you talked about the importance of swift removal. More than 2/3 of asylum seekers don't come from Albania. How is it compatible with the British traditions of humanity and compassion that you are criminalising, incarcerating, potentially forcing statelessness, homelessness, destitution on asylum seekers, many of whom are, as you accept, vulnerable and traumatised, before you have in place agreements with third countries to which you could move in a swift way, your words, those asylum seekers?
This is a country that has always been open, welcoming, compassionate and generous to those in need. Just in the last few years, since 2015, we've welcomed almost 500,000 people to this country. 500,000 from Ukraine, from Syria, from Afghanistan, from Hong Kong. That's our record, that's our compassion. And everyone should be incredibly proud of that. I am. But what is not compassionate is to allow the current situation to persist. There is nothing compassionate about allowing vulnerable people to perish in the Channel. We had a stark reminder of that just a few weeks ago off the coast of Italy when over 50 people died, including children. Right? People being exploited by criminal gangs and smugglers. I was just at Dover earlier today talking to the teams that have to deal with this on the ground, as the Home Secretary and the Immigration Minister see almost every week. There's nothing compassionate about that situation persisting, and there's nothing compassionate or fair about us not being able to help the truly most vulnerable people around the world, because our system is being overwhelmed by those who are jumping the queue and coming here illegally. And they are not the most vulnerable. They are travelling through multiple safe European countries. They are paying people thousands of pounds to get here. So look, I want to move to a system where we break that cycle. We deter people from coming here illegally, jumping the queue. And actually, we as a country can then make sure that we decide who we bring here, how many, and make sure that we target that compassion, that generosity and support on the world's truly vulnerable people. And that's why the legislation that we're announcing today not only does the things that we need it to do to break the cycle and give us the powers we need to send people back, but it also allows Parliament to set a quota on how many people we would welcome here under safe and legal routes, as we've done so brilliantly in the last few years. I think that's a type of system that would command broad support. Right? And I think that's not just the right thing to do, I think it's actually the moral and compassionate thing to do, because the current system is broken and it's not fair on anybody, and the sooner we can put an end to it and focus our support on those who most need it, I think the better off everyone will be.
But if you can't expel them yet, why do you think the small boats will stop?
Well, the legislation is a necessary step on being able to return people either to their own country where it's safe to do so, or to a safe alternative like Rwanda. And I'd say we already are returning people. You mentioned Albania. Albania accounted for 1/3 of all illegal migrants last year because of the deal that we've struck and the new procedures we've put in place. We are now returning hundreds of people back to Albania. And that's right. And that's the right thing to do. We need to focus our resources, focus our generosity and compassion on the world's truly most vulnerable people. That's what I want to do. I think that's what the vast majority of the country wants to do too. At the moment, that's not possible, because we're being overwhelmed with people who are jumping the queue, breaking the laws, and that's not right. And that's what we're going to change. Next, Sky.
Thank you, Prime Minister. 5 years ago, the then Home Secretary, Sajid Javid, said he was going to make this route unviable. Since then, we've seen tens of thousands of people in the last 5 years. Where do you think your predecessors went wrong? Why are you different? And can I also ask, what does success look like to you? Will you be setting targets for where you want the numbers to be in a year's time?
So this is not about dwelling on the past, because the situation has just got far worse. As I said in my remarks earlier, just in the last 2 years, you talked about when Sajid was Home Secretary, so just in the last 2 years, the numbers of people crossing the Channel illegally have more than quadrupled. Right? That is the scale of what is happening, and they're forecast to get worse. And the other thing, it's not just us, right? So anyone who thinks this is just a UK-specific problem isn't being straight with you. This is happening across Europe, right? Europe last year saw something like 63% increase in the numbers of illegal migrants, one of the highest numbers they've experienced in almost a decade. And that's because globally, this is a challenge. And it's only going to get worse unless we do something novel, that we do something bold to try and stop it. And that's what our legislation today does. Now, success is us stopping the boats. Success is us having a system that people come here illegally are returned back to their own country where it's safe, or an alternative. And if we can get that working, as I'm confident that we will be able to, as we already are with Albania, we will see the numbers come down. because people will see that it is not worth their while to risk their lives, to pay gangs thousands of pounds for something that ends up not what they expect. And that is the system that we're going to deliver. Now, we've always said, as I've said to the questions earlier, there's no one silver bullet to this. Right? So not only do we need the legislation to be implemented and make sure that we can implement that as quickly as possible, we also need to cooperate with our allies. We need to make sure that we keep signing returns agreements. We need to step up what we're doing on immigration enforcement, as we are, and raids are increasing dramatically. So those are all the different things that we need to do, and we're going to do all of them. We're firing on all cylinders to grip this problem, and people can judge us on our results. I've only been in this job a few months. We're already making, I think, more progress than we've made in a long time. And as a result of this legislation, I think we now have something that is very powerful. We haven't done anything like this before, and it gives us the tool that we need to implement the system that I described. And we've gone further than anyone's gone before. It's right that we're doing that because the situation has got far worse than it was just 2 years ago, but we're responding appropriately. We're responding with tough measures, but they are responsible, they are proportionate, and crucially, they're fair.
But you're not setting specific targets in terms of the numbers.
Well, I think people will judge us on our results, and as I said, we're already seeing the results. Illegal migration rates up 50% since we announced the proposals to do that with Robert at the end of last year. Already hundreds of people being returned to Albania. We're getting the asylum backlog down as well, down by 6,000 just in the last couple of months since we've improved all the processes there. New deal with the French at the end of last year, hopefully further cooperation to come. We promised new legislation. I'm standing here today with the Home Secretary introducing it. So we are continuing to deliver the things that we said, and I'm highly confident that as we keep moving forward, people will see a big difference on this. Right, next, LBC.
Theo Usher with LBC. Firstly, Prime Minister, you're meeting the French President Emmanuel Macron later this week. Do you accept that in order to be successful with this policy, you are going to need his fulsome cooperation? What are you prepared to offer him in return? And if I may, just very briefly on Sue Gray, do you still have faith in the integrity of her report into Partygate?
On Sue Gray, as you know, the Cabinet Office is reviewing the circumstances of her departure. I'm not going to preempt their findings, so I'm not going to comment further on that situation. With regard to the French, as you heard me say before, there's no one silver bullet to solving this problem. It is a complex problem, and we need to use all the levers, all the tools at our disposal. And a crucial one of those is cooperating with not just the French, but also with our other European allies. So I was really pleased after I became Prime Minister, having spoken to President Macron, we managed to get the Calais group up and running. Suella, the Home Secretary, attended that. That's fantastic, because that's not just France, that's other Northern European countries coming together to discuss this issue, the shared challenge that we all face, and how we can work together to solve it. Right, that meeting happened, and actually there's some very tangible things coming out of that about data sharing and cooperation of our enforcement agencies, which is great. Specifically with the French, we announced a new deal, the biggest deal that we've had, for more patrols on beaches, up 40%, significant. And better cooperation and collaboration between our teams. Again, I've just got back from Dover talking to them about the benefit and the difference of that collaboration works. And I'm very grateful, actually. I put on record my thanks as the Home Secretary. I know she's been over there and spoken to them herself. I'm very grateful to the cooperation and support and collaboration of the French teams on the ground. They work very closely with our teams, and because of the work that they do, they help intercept around about half of all the attempted crossings, and that number varies, and at the moment it's on the way up, which is great news. But that's part of the conversation that we'll be having on Friday, is how can we strengthen and deepen and broaden that cooperation. But this is ultimately a shared challenge, and actually you're seeing across Europe, France is looking at new laws to tighten up their asylum regime. Germany has appointed a special commissioner on asylum. Italy is looking at new laws to talk about how they regulate search and rescue operations in the Mediterranean, because many countries are facing the same challenge. And actually, if we work together, it's going to be easier for us to deal with it, particularly on upstream cooperation of our law enforcement agencies, because the best thing we can do is try and disrupt the gangs, right at the beginning at source before people end up arriving here. And that's the kind of work that we can do more of. And hopefully we'll be having that conversation on Friday as well. But I'm very grateful to the teams in France for the support and cooperation that they have given us, because it does make a difference. Right, who have we got next? GB News.
Tom Harwood at GB News. On the face of the bill, the Home Secretary says that she is unable to make the statement that the provisions of this bill are compatible with the Human Rights Act, which of course incorporated the ECHR into domestic law. Already legions of lawyers are preparing to tackle you over this legislation. Firstly, are you up for the fight? And secondly, what's plan B if they win?
Well, look, of course we're up for the fight, and we'll be standing here if we weren't. But we're confident that we will win. And on the Section 19(1)(b) statement, I think it's really important for everyone to recognise there's absolutely nothing improper or unprecedented about pursuing bills with a 19(1)(b) statement. It absolutely does not mean that the bill is unlawful. We believe that it is lawful, that we are acting in compliance with our international obligations. And we are also meeting our obligations to the British public to make sure that we have control over their borders and that it is them and their elected representatives who are deciding who comes here. But with regard to Section 19(1)(b), as I say, entirely in line with precedent. In fact, a previous Labour government in 2003 used a Section 19(1)(b) statement as they were passing a piece of legislation. We believe we are acting in compliance with international law, in compliance with the ECHR, and if challenged, as you may well be right, and as we've seen in these matters, we do get challenged. We will fight that hard because we believe that we're doing the right thing and it is compliance with our obligations.
But to be clear, no plan B.
I'd say we are confident that we are acting in compliance with our obligations. And again, I just point out on the Rwanda policy, which many people said again was wrong, and we expected the challenge on it. As you saw recently, we were successful in defending that policy. I think actually unequivocally successful in the High Court. That policy is now moving to the Court of Appeal in just over a month's time, so we'll await the outcome of that. But again, we're confident in our arguments. We believe we're doing the right thing, and I believe the courts will see that as well. Right, Talk TV.
Prime Minister, in your speech there, you said you will do whatever is necessary to ensure that you can stop the boats. To follow on from that question, does that include leaving the ECHR, if necessary, to keep your promise to the public? And if I may, a huge part of this plan is detaining people, often for long periods of time, according to the legislation. How many detention centres are you planning to build? Where will they be? And how many people will they house?
So, on the two questions, we don't believe it is necessary to leave the ECHR. We believe that we're acting in compliance with it and meeting our international obligations, but as I said, also meeting our obligations to the British public to have control over our borders and ensure that it's them and their elected government who's in control of who is coming here. I believe that we're acting entirely rightly and correctly in that regard. And I take those obligations seriously, as does the Home Secretary, and that's why we've worked long and hard to design a piece of legislation that is tough, that is novel, that is ambitious, but that is in compliance with our international obligations. And I'm confident that it will be effective. With regard to detention, I'd say the idea is not to have to detain people for prolonged periods of time. And actually what the bill does is completely change how we process people's claims to stop that from happening. Because part of the problem we've got at the moment is people can frustrate the system because they can make one claim and then down the line they make another claim and then another claim, to give you a sense of it. Almost more than 70% of people that we detained pending a removal then filed a modern slavery claim. Right? When we put people and told them they were going to go to Rwanda, 2/3 of them claimed modern slavery towards the end of a process. And we can't have a system like that which can be taken advantage of. So what this new piece of legislation today says is that you've got to make your claim right at the beginning, any and all claims that you have, and we will hear it quickly. In fact, there's very few that will be valid under this new system, and we will process them in a matter of days or weeks. So it's not the idea that people are kept here for indefinitely long periods of time. That's not what we want to see. We want a system that is working far quicker than what we have today so that we can swiftly remove people. We do have thousands of detention places already, and we're in the process of building over 1,000 more in 2 different sites. And we will do everything that we need to make sure that the bill is delivered, and that work has already started. But we're very confident in what it does. But crucially, it's not about detaining people here for months on end. It's about processing them very quickly, which the bill will enable us to do, and then removing them. That's the system we want to move to. Times.
Prime Minister, the Home Secretary today described the ECHR's interim injunctions on Rwanda fights as opaque and deeply flawed. She said that they are undermining our ability to control our borders. Do you agree? Do you think the ECHR overstepped the mark? And are you prepared to take action around that? Secondly, Simon Case is facing a lot of criticism over his WhatsApp messages, which have been leaked to the Telegraph over Matt Hancock. One of them accused you of being bonkers. Will Simon Case still be your Cabinet Secretary by the time of the next election?
Thank you, Steve. Look, on Rule 39, I should have actually addressed that in the previous question. Yes, the Home Secretary is absolutely right, and in the sense that these Rule 39 orders are opaque, and they don't meet, I think, what anyone would describe as a kind of natural justice test. And that's because they're conducted behind closed doors. You don't know the name of the person who's sending these things down, and we have absolutely no right to apply for the case to be dismissed. We have no right to appeal. Those things aren't formalised. As I said, they're just kind of handed down by these unnamed duty judges. It feels like at 5 minutes to midnight, right? So that process does seem not appropriate, and what we want to do is see reform to that process. The Attorney General has already had an informal conversation with the court in Strasbourg about that. I think we believe that other countries, share some of the questions and observations that we've had about how that process works. I think everyone can get behind the idea that, yes, of course, there should be a court that has due process, but that process needs to be fair. And if we think that something's being handed down, we should have the right to know who's doing it and to challenge it and appeal it. That's just, as I said, it's a matter of natural justice. So we will start the process of engaging with Strasbourg to try and get reform to Rule 39. And look, our track record on this is good, actually. Some time ago, we embarked on a similar reform process with the court, particularly on Rule 39, and it resulted in some changes, which are called the Brighton Declaration. Now, I'm not a legal expert, so Suella can probably fill you in on the detail afterwards. But so our track record on this is good, and our concern is we can't be subject to a process that doesn't meet simple tests of natural justice, and that's why we want to try and get that process reformed. And as I said, I'm confident that we'll be able to work with others to do that. And on Simon, look, I haven't read all these messages because I've been busy working on this. But what I would say is the Cabinet Secretary has done a great job actually helping with today. In particular, he works very hard to support me. He works very hard to support the government's agenda, and particularly on the issue of tackling illegal migration. It's very much a cross-government effort, right? And the work that Robert, Suella and I have been doing over the past few months involves lots of colleagues from across government pulling together so that we can grip and solve this problem. The Cabinet Secretary has been at the heart of coordinating all that work. I'm very grateful to him for that, and I look forward to working with him for a very long time to come, quite frankly. So hopefully that will answer your question on that. And lastly, we've got the eye.
Yes, Prime Minister. Large thing from the eye. You've talked a lot about the deterrent effect of these new laws, but how many thousands of Channel asylum seekers do you need to deport before people start getting deterred from making those crossings? And are you confident you have enough capacity in Rwanda? There's only a few hundred places there, and through returns agreements with places like Albania to begin having that deterrent effect quickly once the new laws come in?
So look, on Rwanda, I think it's correct a kind of like misconception about the Rwanda thing. It is an uncapped scheme. So everyone keeps saying we've only got 200 places. It's an uncapped scheme. So that's like everyone should know that. So they should have confidence that that's what's happening there. And having just spoken to the Rwandan president the other night, they remain committed to their partnership with us and looking forward to making sure that it can work properly in the way that we all want it to. But I do think that the deterrent effect can be quite powerful quite quickly. Actually, one of MPs in Parliament today, Tim Loughton, was talking about Home Affairs Select Committee trip that he'd been on to France. And actually, when they were talking to some of the people in France who said that after the Rwanda deal was first announced, they suddenly saw a change in behaviour about people who were there, who stopped them wanting to come over here and were trying to figure out about staying there. And that was just on the fact that they'd heard about Rwanda when it was announced. But also, just look at what's happening in Albania. Right, so we worked hard, got a new agreement with Albania towards the end of last year. I made the statement, probably it was early December. We've just started operationalising that new agreement, the guidance we've changed to our caseworkers here. And again, it's early days, so let's not get carried away, but the signs are very promising. Right, we have now returned hundreds of people, and Robert's been working incredibly hard to get people back on planes. So hundreds of people have been returned. We're also doing comms in Albania, and we are seeing a change in the numbers coming here from Albania and also how our system is treating them when they are here and making it clear that they shouldn't be here and actually they should be refused and sent back. Now, that's only been in place for a matter of weeks, but it does give me the confidence that the deterrence can work and will work. And that's why this bill is so important. And that's probably a good note for us to end on, because that's what this rests on, right? It rests on the simple premise, I think the common sense, straightforward premise, that if you come here illegally, you will not be able to stay. You will be detained and you will be swiftly removed to your own country if it's safe for you to be sent back there, or indeed a safe alternative like Rwanda. And that system, delivered and operational, will serve as a strong deterrent. It will break the cycle of criminals. And if you spend any time with people at Border Force in Calais or anyone who deals with these people, be in no doubt the people who are doing this are criminals. And people are dying and being taken advantage of because of the system that is now in place. And it would not be right to stand here as Prime Minister and allow that to continue and not try absolutely everything we can to stop it from happening. And that is what we are doing, right? We have been working long and hard at this. And as I said, it's complicated. It won't be solved overnight. But with will and determination and creativity, we will be able to grip this problem. And whether the bill's one part, the cooperation with France is another part, returns agreements, enforcements, we are doing it all because when I said at the beginning of the year that we would stop the boats, I meant it. And we will keep working until we've delivered that. Thank you very much.
There we are. It's 1 minute past 6. You're watching the NewsHour. Rishi Sunak there, holding a news conference on the whole issue of small boats. He said our asylum system can be exploited by spurious human rights claims. He said we have to make clear that if you come here illegally, you cannot stay, you will be removed and banned from re-entering the country forever. He said the bill provides the legal framework to do this, although some are already questioning that. He said this will always be a compassionate government, but the current situation is neither moral or sustainable. Let's talk to our Deputy Political Editor, Sam Coates, who was listening to all that. Interesting, Sam. He said, I will absolutely deliver on what I promise. He promised to stop the small boats. I mean, that's quite a gamble.
It is. I mean, he refused to put a number on it. Therefore, it implies that the target that Rishi Sunak is today announcing that he's heading for is 0 small boats crossing the channel by the time of the next election. That is effectively what he is now on the hook for with this package of changes and this legislation that's been announced today. We have some certainty. Rishi Sunak in that press conference underlined the big change is that those people who go across the channel in small boats will face a permanent bar on being able to re-enter the UK and ever apply for any kind of citizenship, naturalisation or registration as a UK citizen. So that's the thing that the legislation does. And what it also does is it gives the Home Secretary of the day, currently Suella Braverman, 28 days to effectively deport, to remove that individual from the United Kingdom, sending them either back to the country that they came from, if that is safe, or to Rwanda, if and when those flights back to Rwanda can be started. So that's what we know, and the Prime Minister insists that he believes that all of this can be done within the European Convention on Human Rights, although he thinks you need to change the process of that, suggesting that Britain's going to embark on some attempts to reform the Strasbourg Court. Good luck. luck, and unlike how Rishi Sunak suggested, I think previous attempts by Britain to reform that court have actually run into some difficulty. But Mark, I think what was interesting about that press conference is we didn't actually get very many answers about the sort of practical side of how this is going to work. Because when you think about it, there were last year something like 45,000 people who came over in small boats. And now the Home Office, its associated agencies, have to effectively get those people, find those people, detain those people and remove them from the UK within 28 days. That, in practical terms, is enormously difficult, not least for a government department that's not exactly got a track record of being able to sort things out very easily. So when people come in, they've first of all got to work out whether they're old enough to be detained, whether they're well enough to be detained and removed. And then the Home Office has got to work out where is safe to take them back to, whether or not there's an agreement to take those people back to that country, an agreement with the country they want to return them to, and what's going on with the Rwanda flights, where the situation is still a little bit opaque. So a huge amount of trust, it seems to me, in this system is being placed in the Home Office to deliver an extraordinary amount of work in a short period of time. Now, whether or not this is a success will all come down to officials in Suella Braverman's department and the associated agencies, Border Force and the like, all working at speed through other really tricky issues like where do you detain them, what happens if people end up being in detention for significantly more than 28 days because taking them back home or somewhere else proves to be quite difficult, or the whole bureaucracy gets clogged up because there are simply so many people coming through. There are lots of practical problems that this government's likely to face even before you get to the potential legal difficulties. And you didn't hear a lot about that today. Questions focusing really on principle. Another big issue of principle that the Prime Minister made clear was changing is that there is in future going to be a cap on asylum claims. And for the first time, there's going to be a numerical ceiling on the number of people that will be given asylum, however desperate it would seem the situation in certain parts of the world. That, another big change in principle. This is a lot for Rishi Sunak to deliver. He wants to be seen as a pragmatic person who can work through the detail in order to deliver for the British people. This is the announcement. This is, in a sense, only the first hurdle we're going to have to watch over the coming months to see how successful he is.
Yeah, I mean, this could be a legal fight that goes the distance. Do you think that ultimately Rishi Sunak is prepared to walk away from the European Convention on Human Rights?
So from all the, how can we put it, very fudgy language that we're getting in the government documents, my best guess at that answer, Mark, is actually no, even though quite a lot of people around him would like to. Rishi Sunak is insisting that the package of legislation that's been outlined today is compatible with the European Convention on Human Rights. There are lots of people that disagree with that, think that it's got to be tested in the Strasbourg court. Rishi Sunak's answer, as I indicated a few minutes ago, is to try and reform the Strasbourg court because he doesn't like the way that it operates. He says that it's opaque and doesn't think that judgments are handed down fairly and can be challenged properly. Now, none of that gets away from the fact that if it is deemed to be incompatible with human rights, then Rishi Sunak has a problem where he'll have a large minority of his own backbenchers and some in his own cabinet wanting him to leave. But bluntly, the kinds of deals on Brexit that he's just done on Northern Ireland, I think you can expect an extremely angry response from other EU countries if he now tries to pull out of ECHR. This is a sort of fight that's going to be deferred, really, I suspect, until the next manifesto ahead of the next election, with two camps on the Tory side, pro and against, trying to get the Prime Minister to follow their view. I suspect he's just kicking the can down the road on that one because it's quite a difficult issue to get too far into the weeds on. The difficult thing, the thing I don't understand, Mark, is whether or not Rwanda flights will start again, even if Strasbourg continue to have doubts on it. There just seems to be such murky language around that in critical parts of government documents that fundamental cornerstone of this plan that says if it's not safe to, or we can't deport you back to the country that you came from, then we'll take you to Rwanda. The legality around that seems very complicated, and I'm not quite sure from anything that's been said at that press conference, said in the House, or from the government documents, what's going to happen with that.
Right, I know you've got to go. Just very briefly, Rishi Sunak off to meet President Macron. How significant could that be?
Well, I think it's significant for a couple of reasons. There'll be lots of policy discussions, tidying up on Brexit, I suspect. Rishi Sunak, no doubt, promising to get through on the British side the legislation that EU are planning to ratify in the coming weeks when it comes to the Northern Ireland deal. There'll also be policy discussions around defence. The UK and France cooperate very closely on defence, even at times where the political relationship, perhaps Macron and Boris Johnson, hasn't been so tight. And they'll also, of course, talk about the stuff that we're discussing today, the issue of migration. How much more can the French do in order to help with patrols across the Channel to stop the small boats? But the much bigger issue, Mark, is just a sort of reset on the UK-French relationship. I think the symbolism of Friday, when this summit's due to take place in Paris, will be one of two countries that haven't had a very easy relationship. You just think back to the leadership contest last summer, Liz Truss unable to say whether or not France was an ally or not. Now Rishi Sunak pressing the reset button, looking to be seen to be working much more collaboratively with our EU neighbours after effectively 7 years of successive prime ministers, starting with Theresa May, effectively beating up Europeans and particularly beating up the French as part of those Brexit negotiations. I think Rishi Sunak is actually changing the direction of diplomatic relations, the way that the UK handles diplomacy. It began in earnest with that Brexit deal, just a week ago, but that set a very different tone from his predecessors. And I think he continues to try and forge relationships and build on consensus and collaboration, which bluntly just hasn't been the British way of doing things since 2016.
OK, Sam, thank you very much indeed. So let's just recap where we are with all this. The government has been defending its plans to clamp down on asylum seekers reaching the UK on small boats. In the last half hour, the Prime Minister said that his plans to detain and remove almost all those making the Channel crossing in this way are tough, but he insisted that the measures are necessary and fair. But Oxfam says Rishi Sunak's new illegal migration bill will only create more cruelty and more misery for migrants. Let's just take a look then at the contents of the bill. It states that anyone arriving in the UK on small boats will be banned from claiming asylum and can be detained without bail within the first 28 days of entry. The new bill will also disqualify illegal entrants from using modern slavery rules to block deportation. Under 18s and those with serious medical conditions will be able to delay removal. Any other claims will be heard remotely after removal. An annual cap determined by Parliament will be introduced for the number of refugees arriving by safe and legal routes. Here's what the Prime Minister had to say at that Downing Street news conference a short time ago.
People must know that if they come here illegally, it will result in their detention and swift removal. Once this happens, and they know it will happen, they will not come and the boats will stop. That is why today we are introducing legislation to make clear that if you come here illegally, you can't claim asylum, you can't benefit from our modern slavery protections, you can't make spurious human rights claims, and you can't stay. We will detain those who come here illegally and then remove them in weeks, either to their own country if it is safe to do so, or to a safe third country like Rwanda. And once you are removed, you will be banned, as you are in America and Australia, from ever re-entering our country. This is how we will break the business model of the people smugglers. And this is how we will take back control of our borders. Now, this bill provides the legal framework needed to deliver this in a way that no other legislation has done before. This is tough, but it is necessary and it is fair. Now, I understand there will be debate about the toughness of these measures. All I can say is we have tried it every other way and it has not worked. So I say again, my policy is very simple. It is this country and your government who should decide who comes here, not criminal gangs. And I will do whatever is necessary to achieve that.
Prime Minister there speaking in the last hour. Let's go live to Dunkirk and our Europe correspondent, Siobhan Robbins. And, well, where you are, Siobhan, the problem they're trying to deal with is pretty clear because these boats continue to come.
That's exactly right. I've been to some of the camps here in Dunkirk and down the road in Calais today to talk to people about this new bill, and no one had any idea that it was going through. When I explained to them the details, if you get caught going on these boats from today, you could get deported, you could get blacklisted from the UK. It didn't really put people off, to be honest, because many of those I've spoken to feel that that's what they want to do. They say they're desperate and they believe, rightly or wrongly, that their best hope of a future that they want is in the UK. Now, the frustration for people sitting in the UK is, well, that's not fair on us. I can imagine people shaking their fists at the television saying, well, they're in France, why can't they stay there? But that is the reality of the problem that Rishi Sunak and his government have to deal with, that there are thousands of people who want to cross the channel. And when I spoke to charity workers about whether they thought this bill would make a difference, their concern was that actually it could just make these crossings even more dangerous, because they feel that if there's a crackdown, then the smugglers will still want to get their money, so they'll still run the boats, but in a more dangerous way. They'll try and do it undercover. People will be snuck into the UK. They'll be more at risk of being exploited. So that's another problem that has to be kept on the radar as well. I think the big question that everyone wants answered is, will this bill work if it does come into force? And that is simply a question that cannot be answered here right now, because people just don't know about it. And I think that for it to be effective, that we'll have to see quite a lot of disruption to those smuggling gangs, which will involve widespread cooperation with France and other EU countries as well, because until the smugglers who are controlling these routes are basically stopped from being able to do it effectively, until a message is given to people that if they pay these smugglers, they might not get across the channel, that they're not going anywhere, then people will keep on trying.